Good evening and welcome to Watchmen on the Wall. Watchmen on the Wall is the first current affairs program on South African television from a biblical Christian perspective. We want to go beyond the headlines to bring you news, views and expert analysis from a Christian perspective on the many challenging issues we face in society. Tonight in the studio with me we have Pearl Coupe from Pretoria. Pearl is going to help me co-anchor this program. Welcome to the set, Pearl, and it's good to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Errol. It's wonderful to be here, and welcome to our viewers.
Paul, just from the outset, we want to give our viewers an understanding of the necessity of a show like Watchmen on the Wall. Tell me, what is your perception, your understanding? Do you think a show like this is necessary in South Africa right now?
Well, you know, Errol, I think it's not only necessary, actually, I think it's long overdue. It's very important that we have shows like this to educate and to sensitize the general public. I think there's a little bit of some apathy, a little bit of complacency, and definitely as believers, we need to know that our role is to be salty, our role is to provide the light, and our role is to be exemplary. And to do that, it requires that one be educated and have a certain amount of knowledge.
I'm glad you said that, because the goal of this show is to counter the misinformation and distortions in the secular media.
Yeah.
And what we do find is they give one side of the story. What we're planning to do is obviously give the other side of the story.
Absolutely.
And the objective is to educate, inform, and equip Christians to fulfill their biblical mandate to be salt and light in society. So that's why I also feel that this show is so necessary, especially at this time with so many of the agendas being pushed in society. We need to equip our Christian citizens in South Africa with the knowledge and the facts on how to deal with this issue. So I'm very grateful that you came down to the Cape Town studios to be with us this evening, and we hopefully will see more of you as we try to establish a studio in Pretoria where you can interview government leaders, movers and shakers, policymakers.
Yes.
Tonight we're going to be talking about the human trafficking issue. And the reason we want to start with that is because it's a controversial issue. Many people don't believe human trafficking is a big threat in South Africa. There's a bill in Parliament called the Prevention and Combating of Trafficking in Persons Bill that has been stuck in Parliament for about more than 3 years. It still hasn't been signed into law. And later on, we're going to be talking to Steve Swart from from Parliament, the ACDP MP, who serves on the Justice Portfolio Committee. And we're also going to talk to a law enforcement deputy chief about their experience on the ground. What is your experience with human trafficking, or what is your perspective on that issue?
Well, you know, I think it's not only a topical and relevant issue for South Africa, but even from a global perspective. And, you know, recently in the month of June, I was at the International Labour Organization conference, where it was a main theme. You know, one of the issues they were looking at, aside from youth unemployment, was forced labor and trafficking issues.
That's right.
So that certainly tells you that it's important from a global perspective. And I think it's very critical for us living in South Africa to understand the nature of trafficking, the issues that revolve around it, and the consequences of not addressing it. So I think it's timeless that we're dealing with this issue
There's
now.
this huge call in South Africa to decriminalize the sex industry. And they're saying, the argument they're making is that it will help the women, it will protect women and children from being abused and exploited. Do you believe that?
Absolutely not. I mean, there's no way, and it's been shown in so many countries, you know. In fact, the countries that formerly had decriminalized or had legalized prostitution are now reversing it.
That's right.
So you have countries
like the
Netherlands, Sweden, Iceland, Norway are all countries which formerly had legalized prostitution, and they're now reversing that. And it's shown statistically that once they started doing that, their cases in trafficking dramatically and drastically dropped.
So, especially when law enforcement is focused on the demand side. We see that a lot happens there. So I'm looking forward to my interview with Naidoo of specialized law enforcement in the city of Cape Town, because they've had some great successes in that area. We've invited JUSTINE DEMMER of the National Freedom Network into the studio, and you're going to interview, you're going to talk to her about some of the great work they're doing, and the ladies, the Christian ladies, that's given their life and their time and their energy to work on the streets to rescue these women out of prostitution and out of trafficking situations.
Yes.
And I think that's going to be an interesting interview, and the viewers, you must stay tuned for that interview. And if we've got a lot to talk about, we want to invite Justine back in to a following program and get a lot of the detail about their work. They deserve support.
Absolutely.
They need support, and they deserve it because they're doing such critical work in this country. But most people are unaware of it. And we want to get that out to the viewers there so they understand what is happening with trafficking, what is happening in the sex industry, the lies in the mainstream media, which we want to expose. We want to set the record straight. And that's what Watchmen on the Wall is all about.
Absolutely.
So thank you once again, Pearl, for joining us in the studio. I know that this show is going to go from strength to strength as we tackle the controversial issues, the places where people don't necessarily want to go, but which we believe is important for our viewers, for Christians in this country to know and understand, and more importantly, to get involved.
Yes, absolutely.
So when we come back, we're going to be talking to Steve Swart, MP. We're going to be talking to Nathan Ladegoody. We're going to be talking to Peter Hammond. So I want you to stay tuned and enjoy the first and inaugural show of Watchmen on the Wall here on TBN Africa. Welcome back to Watchmen on the Wall, and in the studio we have a special guest, which is Nathan Ladegoody, the Assistant Chief of Law Enforcement Specialized Services at the City of Cape Town. Welcome to the studio, Nathan, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Errol.
Nathan, we invited you into the studio to talk about law enforcement, in particular the successes you've had here in the City of Cape Town with breaking down the sex industry, closing down brothels, arresting pimps, and rescuing women and children out of trafficking. Tell us a little bit about, we've seen headlines in the media, but we want to hear from you what your experiences have been.
Yes, thank you, Errol. The unit that deals with these issues is the Vice Squad, name given to the unit by the members of the communities. The human trafficking is actually a very serious and a topic near to my heart. From last year, say mid last year, we've addressed over 2,000 prostitutes. And during these actions, we've come across numerous human trafficking cases.
So when you say you've addressed over 2,000 prostitutes, you're talking about arresting them and profiling them?
That's correct.
They're not put into prison?
No.
They're just profiled?
They just profiled. They are issued fines. Those prostitutes who continue with these contraventions are ultimately brought before the courts, and then the magistrate deals with them. And
this is under the Sexual Offences Act?
No, this is under the City of Cape Town's Street and Public Places bylaw.
The bylaws.
The bylaw itself. Okay. We had numerous cases as well for the human trafficking, and I think the worst case that we've came across, and this was about a few months ago, was when two Chinese national women were actually enticed here under the false pretenses of obtaining employment. The first week they were subjected to rape by numerous men of various nationalities.
And this is happening in Cape Town?
Yes. This was actually a house in the Gurud area. We received information, and the unit rescued the two petrified ladies.
Young ladies.
Yes.
How old were they?
The one was aged 19, and the other one was aged 23 years.
Okay, they were still fairly young.
Yes, they were fairly young.
Now, we've been reading in the newspapers, seeing in television, various headlines of trafficking incidents, especially in prostitution, in the sex industry. You guys have been doing an incredible job busting these crime syndicates, closing down brothels, rescuing women. There is a debate. We sat in Parliament, the deliberation of the anti-trafficking bill. And there's some people who hold the view that trafficking isn't really a big problem in South Africa. There is incidences, but it's not really a threat in South Africa. Tell me, what is your view? What have you seen on the streets?
We've noticed a trend from last year that these type of cases are starting to increase. We come across it more and more every day.
So there is an escalation, there is an increase, steady.
Yes. Since the city established the specific unit, became fully functional in 2011, we've noticed that these cases we are uncovering more of these cases every month.
Every month. And the activity just before the World Cup, was there a lot more activity then? Or is it just a gradual increase as we go along?
We noticed there was a gradual increase from the 2010. This unit became functional, actually, we can say January 2011. It was established after the World Cup in 2010. Yeah. But we've noticed there was definitely an increase in these cases.
The age of the girls that are being rescued from trafficking, what are the age groups?
We had a case where the youngest was 15 years old to 17, ranging from 19. One specific case in the Richards Plain area where 6 of these girls were brought from a country town.
From a rural area?
From a rural area. Also under the false pretenses of work. Brought to a house in Richards Plain, which was actually adapted to house cells for these ladies. And fortunately, we could get to them before they were sold.
And we're talking about human trafficking. It doesn't just cover sexual slavery and those issues. But are you seeing that the issue of human trafficking is mainly in the sex industry?
Yes.
Is that your understanding?
Yes, definitely. Human trafficking is mostly in the sex industry.
And the syndicates, the crime organizations that are controlling the sex industry in South Africa, is it local or international?
It's both. We found that most of the men involved in these cases were foreign nationals. We had
what kind of foreign nationals?
Nigerians.
Others?
Muslim Nigerians. Then we got your people from China.
China.
We used to get them that's involved in these cases. And these women are actually tortured if they do not want to submit to the needs of these men.
We've seen a case in the newspapers of 2 Chinese women who were running brothels in the Goodwood area here in Cape Town. And this case dragged on for a number of years, and then finally they were fined 2,000 rand and let off the hook. Now they trafficked 3 young Chinese women out of China into South Africa under false pretenses as well. We've got a job for you, and when they came here, they were forced into prostitution. And do you agree this 2,000 rand fine, that was appropriate for that kind of crime?
Definitely not. We had one case now that was concluded in February this year. It wasn't one of our cases, but it was where a human trafficker actually received an imprisonment sentence of 23 years. So we're looking at that type of sentencing, and much more severe, because these women are not only trafficked and kept, they are forced on drugs, they are raped, they are tortured, and to us this is a very serious offense that deserves a more serious punishment.
I agree with you, but do you believe that the lack of stiffer sentences and penalties is due to the lack of comprehensive legislation?
Yes.
That we don't have the prevention and combating of trafficking of persons, we don't have that signed into law yet, and so people are getting away with lesser sentences, even though they should be getting harsher sentences. Do you believe
Yes, that is definitely a factor. If a trafficker knows that he's going to get life imprisonment, they're going to think twice.
So you're also making a call for the anti-trafficking law to be implemented as soon as possible?
Definitely, it's going to make our work easier out there.
That's
and
exactly
what the unit is doing, it's going to be, it's going to be more meaningful.
Nathan, I want to thank you for coming into the Watchmen on the Wall studios, talking to us, giving us these stats. It's very important that our viewers are informed and educated and know about these issues, because we believe also that trafficking is a growing scourge in our country. So thank you for coming in, and God bless you with your work. We hope you go from success to success.
Thank you, Errol.
Next, we're going to be talking to Steve Swart. He's the MP for the ACDP in Parliament, and he also serves on the Justice Portfolio Committee in Parliament. We want to talk to him and ask him where the anti-trafficking bill is in Parliament. We don't know where it is. We know it has passed from the National Assembly to the National Council of Provinces, but when is it going to be implemented into law? Next, Steve Swart. Stay tuned. Welcome back in the studio with me tonight. We are privileged to have Steve Swart with us, the ACDP Member of Parliament and serving on the Justice and Constitutional Development Portfolio Committee. This is a mouthful. But welcome to the studio, Steve. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you, Errol, and good evening to our viewers.
Thank you. We've just had a chat with Nathan Ladegudi, the Deputy Chief of Law Enforcement in the City of Cape Town, talking about trafficking, the many instances of human trafficking that they have uncovered, the arrests they've made, and a lot of women that have been rescued out of trafficking. So this issue doesn't appear to be going away. And the question on most people's minds, and our viewers out there, is what's happened to the anti-trafficking bill, or better known as the Prevention and Combating of Trafficking in Persons bill? We do know that it passed the National Assembly and is now with the National Council of Provinces. But the question people are asking is, why is it taking so long for this bill to become a reality and to be signed into law and implemented?
Yes, thank you, Errol, and thank you for having me on the show. Can I firstly say that this is an issue that's been a passion of mine, the combating of human trafficking, and thank you for the good work that you've done as well, the submissions to Parliament. Where the issue is at the moment, it's been passed by the National Assembly where we serve and where all the main work is done. It's a Section 75 bill, which means it has to be sent to the National Council of Provinces as well. Now, it doesn't mean that they have to have sit-ins and everything. So we are hoping...
Public participation.
Correct.
They don't need to have that. You've done that.
We've done all the public participation. You made submissions. Many other parties made submissions, people, NGOs who are doing incredibly good work. And we are hoping that it will be finalized in the next couple of months. You will know that it was a very complex bill. You will know that the ACDP pushed it from the word go. It was tabled in the run-up to the Soccer World Cup 2 years ago. So it has been delayed inordinately long, and we agree with you in that regard. However, there is certain complexities to this bill. And one of the main problems was that we did not want illegal immigrants to ride on the back of this bill, which qualifies a number of victims of human trafficking for social welfare benefits and such things. Now, we know we've got in excess of 4 million illegal immigrants in South Africa. Right. So it was a great concern of ours that only the victims of human trafficking should benefit from the provisions of this bill.
So is this why the Justice Committee took so long?
Correct. The Minister of Home Affairs and the Home Affairs Department came at a late stage and said, look, they've got huge concerns about this bill. They're concerned that illegal refugees will say they are now victims of trafficking and therefore they're entitled to the benefits of this bill. We've managed to deal with a lot of those issues and placate it, and we've now come to the point that we've finalized the bill as far as the National Assembly is concerned. But let me just emphasize that right up to now, as I'm sure Mr. Nathan from the police indicated, there is sufficient legislation to convict the perpetrators, the human traffickers.
We understand that, but we've had an incident where 2 Chinese women were fined 2,000 rand for trafficking 3 young women into South Africa and forcing them into prostitution. And the anti-trafficking bill is the most comprehensive piece of legislation. That's why people are so eager to have this implemented, because we know it's the only bill that can comprehensively deal with the complex issue of trafficking, and that's why we want it in there. The question I wanted to ask you is, in the Justice Portfolio Committee, there was this perception that a few people thought that trafficking wasn't really a big issue in South Africa. Is that perception still there?
Well, what happened immediately after the Soccer World Cup was we as the ACDP had pushed the bill, had really said, let's do it before the World Cup because of the expectations that trafficking would spike during the World Cup. Now, as a result of many prayers and visibility and police visibility and public warnings, it didn't spike. After the World Cup, when the Justice Committee met again, the members said, well, there was no trafficking, therefore do we still need the bill?
We don't know about it, so it doesn't exist.
I objected strenuously. I said the fact that it wasn't as spiked does not mean that it doesn't occur. And we know for a fact that there were incidents that weren't in the World Cup courts, but elsewhere. And so I pushed it and I said, I insist that we continue with this bill. It comes from the executive. Our state president signed the Palermo Protocol, which is an international convention requiring comprehensive legislation to combat human trafficking. As a result of that, that is why this bill is there. So there was no question that anyone could withdraw the bill. We were going to continue with it. We insisted it must be continued with, and that perception was soon allayed when we then had all the public submissions. The problem is about data. Nobody knows the extent of human trafficking, but we know it is much wider than people would like to believe.
We don't have the intelligence, and I agree with you on that. But you see, people out there, ordinary people, and especially our next guest, JUSTINE DEMMER of the National Freedom Network, they're working with safe houses and people that are out there rescuing women off the streets, and they know this is a growing crime in South Africa. young women, young girls as young as 12 years old are under threat, are under danger, are becoming vulnerable. So there's huge pressure amongst people to get this bill implemented and signed into law. So I want to ask, can you give us some kind of indication when this bill is expected to be signed into law and when it will be implemented in South Africa?
Well, it's obviously difficult for me to speak on behalf of the NCOP, which is the second House of Parliament, but I've already been engaging members of Parliament that serve on that committee, the Security Committee of the NCOP, to push this bill and to finalize it because of the interest and the pressure from civil society and my passion to have it passed. We need to have it passed. The bulk of the work has been done. 99% of the bill has been done. And there is no reason why it should be inordinately delayed. And that's why I'm saying within the next 1 or 2 months, it should be passed by the NCOP. Hopefully they don't amend it in any way. If they amend it at all, then it's got to come back to us. But if they don't amend it, then it can be signed into law immediately. It's been costed. The funds are available. There's no reason why the bill shouldn't be finalized as soon as possible.
I know this might seem like an unfair question, but is there anything the public can do to try to put pressure on the National Council of Provinces to finalize this bill and get it to the President to be signed into law?
You'll remember that you sent a lot of emails to the Justice Portfolio Committee, which I believe were useful and helpful, notwithstanding the fact that there were some comments from the chairperson. I believe that it's good for members of civil society to send emails to Parliament, in this case to the Select Committee on Justice and Safety and Security, to say, when is this bill going to be finalized? It is necessary. We've got incidents on the street that we need victims' support. And that's the main reason for the bill, is the support for victims, the funding for that.
Yeah.
And we need that, and please prioritize this bill. It is a growing, worldwide, it's the second largest crime, second to the illegal arms deals, now human trafficking. It's bypassed drug trade. So we need to be so aware that this is a growing problem, and it's not only sexual purposes in South Africa, but we know labor practices as well, which is massive in South Africa. That's not even on any data. So we need to finalize this bill, and I undertake, as people have said, like a William Wilberforce, to make sure that it is passed as quickly as possible.
Steve, we want to thank you for coming into the Watchmen on the Wall set, for talking to us about this issue. Thank you for your passion. You were very passionate. You helped us so much in getting this bill moved forward. Thank you for the great speech you made in the National Assembly. You used William Wilberforce as an example of a man that spent most of his life fighting against human slavery. We want to thank you for being a modern day William Wilberforce, and thank you for coming to speak to us.
Thank you so much, Errol, for the opportunity.
When we come back, Pearl Coupe will be interviewing JUSTINE DEMMER from the National Freedom Network, a group of Christian women doing extraordinary work helping to rescue women and children off the streets out of prostitution. Welcome back. I am privileged tonight to have in the studio with us Dr. Peter Hammond. Dr. Peter Hammond is a historian, a missionary, and an author of numerous Christian books, one of my personal heroes. Peter, welcome to the studio, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Errol. Great to be with you.
This segment of the show is called Deconstructing the Myths Out There. There's a lot of myths about the church history, about the Crusades, about the Spanish Inquisition. And what we hope to do with this segment is educate Christians so that they have a biblical Christian worldview and an understanding of their history. And I know that you have written numerous articles in Join magazine and other publications about church history, about the Spanish Inquisition, about the Crusades. And so could you help us and enlighten our viewers with the facts behind these issues?
With pleasure. The Crusades are one of the most misunderstood events probably in history. The moment you start being involved in any kind of evangelism, somebody's going to come up with, but what about the Crusades? Especially if you're involved in evangelism amongst our Muslim neighbors, many of them will be pre-positioned to explode with outrage over the Crusades. And
what is their understanding of the Crusades? What is this perception that is so bad about the Crusades that make people ashamed of it?
Well, of course, most people don't actually know much about the Crusades, but there's this popular perception that the Crusades were aggressive, vicious colonial enterprises of land-hungry, greedy Christians who were invading Muslim people's lands. and the Muslims were peacefully minding their own business while these aggressive Christians suddenly start trying to colonize their lands and expand and force people at the point of the sword to be converted to Christianity. And so the Crusades become a kind of catch-all for an aggressive colonial kind of Christianity. The only point is, the word crusade doesn't appear anywhere in the Bible. You won't find the word crusade in the Bible.
So where does that word come from?
It means in aid of the cross, and it was a term used for the defensive wars generated from the 12th century through to the 13th century in order to try and recapture Christian lands which had been conquered by Muslim invaders. What had happened was, now you will hear people like Bill Clinton saying all the problems in the Middle East began with the Crusades. Well, in fact, that's
just obviously untrue.
That is just so untrue. It's almost laughable, because the Crusades were a reaction, a belated reaction to 500 centuries, 500 years of Islamic jihad. Now, while you won't find the word crusade in the Bible, you do find the word jihad throughout the Quran. And while the Crusades ended 700 years ago, jihad is continuing to this day. What people need to understand is, in the first century of Islam, in the first century after the death of Muhammad, Muslims conquered the whole of North Africa and the Middle East, which used to be the heartland, the bastion, the birthplace of Christianity, destroyed over 3,200 churches, forcibly converted millions of people who used to be Christians and forced them to point the sword to become Muslims, or enslaved them, literally. They massacred some of the greatest cities in the world, killing all inhabitants in places like Carthage, one of the greatest cities in the world, or Alexandria, which was one of the very greatest cities in the world, destroying the greatest library in the world with 6 million books and manuscripts. And the hostility of the Islamic jihadists towards Christianity is the background, which is essential unless we want to understand the Crusades. So after 5 centuries of Islamic jihad, going as far as colonizing Spain and Portugal and invading Europe and coming in as far as Poitiers in France, almost as close as Paris. So at one point, Europe was in danger of falling to Islam. And the Christians counterattacked with the Crusades, so the Crusades were a belated military reaction to the 5 centuries of jihad.
It was a defense of Christianity.
It was. In fact, in the century before the Crusades began, 10,000 Christian churches had been destroyed by Islamic jihadists. In fact, if you take before the Crusades, in the 5 centuries before the Crusades began, 30,000 Christian churches had been destroyed or forcibly converted into mosques before the Crusades began. So for Bill Clinton to say the Crusades began the problems in the Middle East is just not intellectually honest.
So this politically correct view that Crusades was marauding Christians, taking lands away from other people, who's pushing that view? Because I think that's the question on most people's minds today.
Interestingly enough, throughout history, Muslims have been pretty calm about the Crusades and didn't talk about much. But in the 20th century, secular humanists started bringing up the Crusades as something to throw at Christians to show that Christians are something bad that you've got to defend against. And so the Muslims in the 20th century picked this up from the secular humanists, the atheists who were attacking Christians, and thought, this is a useful weapon to use. It's just an argument, that a general purpose club with which you can whack on the head any Christian the moment he starts to evangelize.
There's obviously no truth behind that. It's just a weapon the secular humanists are using, one of the many weapons, to undermine Christianity.
And that's why we need to know about it, because if we understand, first of all, I didn't take part in the Crusades. My grandfather didn't. In fact, the Crusades ended 700 years ago. When we realize the Crusades were a reaction and they ended 700 years ago, but jihad is continuing today, then it puts into perspective. Now, friends of mine started the reconciliation walks, where they started to walk from Europe and travel through the Middle East, starting with Turkey, to apologize for the Crusades, which ended 700 years ago. At the very moment, so some of my friends were doing this, which I think is a very misguided missionary enterprise, our mission base in Sudan was being bombed by the Sudan Air Force, and we were coming under rocket and artillery fire by jihadists in Sudan. Of course, we know today churches are being bombed in Nigeria, in Afghanistan, in Iraq,
absolutely. It's in the news.
Egypt.
Yeah.
So Christians are under attack by jihadists today, and I don't hear Muslims apologizing for jihad. And yet Christians are still apologizing for crusades, which none of us were ever involved in. In fact, none of our relatives that we ever knew of were involved in it. So it really looks like double standards, and it's quite inconsistent.
I think why this myth is being perpetuated is because most Christians are not educated. they don't understand the background, the history of Christianity, and especially things like the Crusades. And that's why we invited you into the studio. And we want to do this as a regular segment on Watchmen on the Wall, so that you can give the proper perspective, give the facts, so that people understand their background and they're not ashamed of the church and Christianity defending itself against marauding attacks from whether it is Muslims or any other group. And so, Peter Hammond, we thank you for the work that you're doing. We thank you for coming into the studio. We want to continue this discussion next week because we think it's important and it's necessary and that Christians need to understand. We want to get a biblical Christian worldview into Christians in this country and across Africa, so they stop apologizing for what the church has done in the past and begin to understand that without Christianity and what it has achieved in the nation, we wouldn't have had many of the successful civilizations that has given the world so much. You would agree with that, of course.
Oh, yes. Karl Marx said the first battlefield is the rewriting of history. If
Absolutely.
we don't know our history, we have no future.
Absolutely.
We've got to know our history. History is actually his story. When we can understand history from God's perspective, instead of from the secular humanist perspective, we'll be in a better position to win people to Christ.
Peter Hammond, thank you for coming into the studio and informing, enlightening us on the history of the church. When we come back, Pearl Coop is going to interview JUSTINE DEMMER from the National Freedom Network. Stay tuned for that. You don't want to miss it.
Welcome to this section where we are going to be looking at ordinary Christians who are doing extraordinary things. And today we have the privilege of being with JUSTINE DEMMER, and she is the chairperson of the National Freedom Network. And we're going to have a chat with her today to ask her about the wonderful work that she and her team are doing in the area of trafficking. So I think just as a starting point, JUSTINE, let me ask you, how would you define trafficking?
That is a very good question.
Yeah.
It's a good place to start because most people have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we do is we try and keep it really simple to try and explain.
Yeah.
So it's about being tricked. You're being offered a job that sounds fantastic, and they tell you you've got to go down to Cape Town for the job, or up to Durban, or to Taiwan.
Yeah, so most people don't get into it voluntarily or knowingly.
No, they're tricked.
Right.
Because it's so much easier to avoid the police when you trick somebody, because no one's going to lay a claim of missing persons. Nobody's going to go look for a kidnapped person.
Right.
And also it makes the person easier to control because they feel, well, I got myself into this.
Right.
So they get trapped, right?
Right. So
then they get taken, they get transported. So it's about transportation from one place to another, usually from a place of familiarity to a place of complete unfamiliarity.
Yes.
Very often a country where you don't know the language, you don't know the people, you don't know the culture, you can't even buy a phone card. So transportation, then being trapped, you are kept under lock and key, under force, through threat, through extreme violence, whatever, and from there you are traded. It's about trading, it's about making money through using those people over and over again for domestic labor, for sexual purposes, for begging even, whatever means they can. It's about being traded.
Yeah.
And then the average lifespan of a trafficked victim is really 4 years before they are terminated or they kill themselves, just from what they have gone through, basically.
Yeah.
And this can happen domestically on a very local basis, just around the corner, or it can happen internationally from one country to another.
Yeah. And I was reading an article the other day talking about all those various different being trapped and tricked, where by sometimes the people who are doing this actually take their passports, their identity away from them under the guise of looking for jobs. And of course, without a passport or any ID, you're pretty much helpless. Yeah. You have no way of even proving who you are. So that's the trapping element of it.
Absolutely, and the key factor in that is control.
Yeah.
Who is in control?
Yeah.
If you're looking for a trafficked victim, is this potentially a trafficking scenario?
Yeah.
You've got to see, is the person in control or is somebody else controlling them?
Yeah.
Their money, their food, where they can go, their passport, and all of those elements. It's one of the key factors.
Yeah, and I think that's important because I think most of us would want to know, why doesn't this person just leave if they're not there voluntarily? So it's important that we bring out that aspect of being trapped and tricked. I'd like to just turn to you a little bit more and your organization, because this segment is really about featuring people who are doing great work. So tell us a little bit more about your organization, which is the National Freedom Network.
Yes. The National Freedom Network is really not an organization as such. It's a gathering of people coming together to try and impact and save and rescue these victims.
Yeah.
We wanted to give it a name because we needed to pull everyone together. And when I started getting involved in 2009, 2010, I realized like my strength and what I serve with really is strategy and structure and understanding. And everybody was running around doing vague things here and there for trafficking, trying to help, but it's such an organized crime. It's so very, very organized.
Yes.
And if the perpetrators are organized and the response is disorganized, we can't possibly effectively help the victims.
Right, so we need a strategy.
We need a strategy.
Right.
So what we did is we gathered the network together, as many Christians as we could find who were doing work in this area, drawing in law enforcement, drawing in the government, and we asked them, what are the things that are needed? What is the strategy? What are the gaps? Where can we help? And we started in every province just getting organizations going, getting coalitions going.
Yeah.
And we've probably got 5 really well-established ones, and we're trying to establish a coalition in every province, get the strategy implemented, find the gaps, meet the need, because it's the kind of crime that unless people are proactive, nothing's going to happen. It's so underground.
Yeah, that's great. So let's talk a little bit about maybe the human side, the human element, because people don't realize, I think, how real trafficking is, especially here in this nation.
It is incredibly real. Unfortunately, we have a very strong crime syndicates in this country, and human trafficking is the 3rd largest crime syndicate, grossing syndicate in the world.
Wow.
Which means that wherever strong undergrounds are happening, that is where human trafficking is happening. So we know, and we've come up against it often enough, but we've also realized that with a gathering response, they cannot actually get away with it for too long. Because when people start to realize and step in, you're going to make it really difficult for them to operate.
Any personal stories that you can relate?
Oh, yeah, there's so many, but we've just had one really amazing success story recently, and it really is a networking story, which is what we're about. The part of our network are people who do outreach to victims before they can get rescued, because rescue takes a lot of investigation, it takes a lot of planning, and then it can happen. So you have people going out into the streets to meet with the children that are being used, to meet with the women trapped in prostitution, trapped in trafficking scenarios and stuff. And my friend Diane used to do this kind of work. She's now our network colleague up in Joburg. And she's just had one lady get back to her after, I think it's been about 2 years since she started this relationship with this woman, simply by going to go and spend time with her. Yeah. And she said, you know what, I think I'm finally able to get away. She says they've relaxed their control and I think I can escape. Can you help? And Diane immediately let the entire network know. And we gathered the troops, and it wasn't just people from our network, it was people from churches, all different churches in Joburg, people from across the country. And when they went to go and pick up this woman, they were prepared for her. They had already organized a place for her to stay. They had organized for her to get in touch with her children. They had organized for her to get counseling. A counselor came in for free. Wow. From there, you know, she started coming to church. From there, we've relocated her closer to her family so that she can try and reintegrate back into her family. Awesome. And she's actually made it. Wow. We've had other people who've also tried to get away, and unfortunately they've been found in the back alley, shot in the head the next day. Wow. We're not talking about things that are easy here, but we are talking about the fact that if every Christian, every person can give what they've got, we can actually help the ones and twos that the Lord is asking us to help.
Awesome way to end this off, I think, this segment, is to say, how can people get involved? Because, you know, we have that wonderful testimony. And I'm sure there are people out there, some of our viewers. Contact details, how can they get in touch with you?
Okay. Firstly, if there is a suspected trafficking case, you see control issues being acted out, you see the fear, you suspect that this might have happened to somebody, there's a toll-free number that we're all connected to, 0800 555 999.
0800 555 999.
All victims can phone, all public can phone, give the information through. We're well connected with all of the investigators. We will follow it up. What we'll do after that is get them into a safe house if possible.
Wonderful.
But there is so much that Christians can do. There's so much that everyone can do, from prevention work. We have a lot of ladies who simply do they go out into the schools and tell people how they can get trapped. then at the safe houses there's so much help that's needed. You know, even if you can just bake cookies, make food, do a translation, there's so much that can be done by each and every person.
Well, that's wonderful. Our time is up for now. This is a very enthralling topic, and we want to encourage anybody who wants to get involved, please look up the National Freedom Network. Stay with us and join us after this commercial break.
Welcome back, and we want to wrap up this first show of Watchmen on the Wall here on TB in Africa. You have seen, as we interviewed Nathan Ladegoody, the Vice Squad Assistant Director, Steve Swart, the Member of Parliament, and who serves on the Justice Portfolio Committee. We've also spoken to JUSTINE DEMMER, who's doing incredible work helping and rescuing women off the streets. Human trafficking is a complex issue. We've heard that from Steve Swart. We haven't scratched the surface on this issue in the show, and I think we have to come back and talk about it a little bit more, because this is such a growing crime in South Africa. I believe that our viewers need to really understand this challenge, so that they can play into the issue and help and support organizations like the National Freedom Network. What do you think, Paul?
Absolutely. I think there's so many opportunities and so many levels at which our viewers can get involved. You know, we've spoken to many different people. Just speaking to Justine, and she's talked about how people can get involved, not only helping with their network, but even mothers at home, you know, can get involved just by supporting. You can get involved financially. From a legislative point of view, you know, you can lobby. I think the body of Christ, especially churches and ministries, need to even start by educating their own congregations, and maybe even forming their own lobby groups and organizations that are sensitized to do something about it there.
Do you believe the church is apathetic when it comes to issues like this? Do you think it's a consequence of a lack of education and information, or people don't just believe that these problems are big enough for Christians and churches to get involved with?
Well, you know, I think yes and no. You do have people who are doing things, and we've had wonderful examples like Justine.
That's right.
And I'm so encouraged to know that every week we're going to be doing a segment, you know, showcasing the ordinary people who are doing extraordinary things. I think it's marvelous to just give testimonies of people, because I don't, you know, we shouldn't make it look like there's nobody doing nothing. But I still think there's a lot of room. There's a lot of room for people to get involved, and I hope and pray that when they see people like Justine and other people, you know, they'll be encouraged and provoked to also get involved and want to be a serving member of the body of Christ.
A voice in the nation.
A voice, yes.
That's what we need, more Christian voices.
Absolutely.
It's becoming increasingly clear that we do.
Absolutely.
And we want to ask our viewers out there to write to your Member of Parliament. If you don't know who that is, we're going to put up some email addresses on the screen for you to write to. And just politely ask the chairperson of the Security Commission in the National Council of Provinces, please expedite this bill. It's been stuck in Parliament now for more than 3 years. We need the anti-trafficking bill to be signed into law and to be implemented so we can begin to protect vulnerable women and children. I want you to do that. We want to get everybody involved. Also, you can pray into this issue. You can support the National Freedom Network. There's so much the church can do. And we are here to inform you and keep you updated about the issues. Next week, we're going to deal with the erosion of Christian values and freedoms in South Africa. You don't want to miss this program. We're speaking to Mani van Vieren, the man that was sued by 2 lesbians and forced to accommodate them at his Christian guest lodge. We're also going to be talking to a Christian lawyer. So join us next week here on Watchmen on the Wall, as we provide you with a different and unique perspective on the challenges facing Christians today. Christians are being forced to violate their beliefs, their freedoms, and their principles by courts and others. You want to see this. See you next week.